Response: I have spent 3 decades studying armored warfare, anti-tank systems, and the evolution of ground combat from the deserts of Iraq to the plains of Eastern Europe. I commanded a mechanized battalion. I have reviewed after-action reports from every major tank engagement since the Gulf War. Nothing in that experience prepared me for what I reviewed in the classified assessment that crossed my desk on April 22nd regarding an engagement in southern Lebanon that occurred 72 hours earlier. 1,500 9M133 Kornet anti-tank guided missiles transferred from Russian stocks to Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps units and deployed forward to Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon were used in a coordinated ambush operation against the Israeli 7th Armored Brigade on April 19th. The engagement lasted 11 hours. When it ended, 83 Israeli main battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles had been destroyed or rendered inoperable. That represents approximately 62% of the brigade's organic combat power. Over 240 Israeli soldiers were killed, 317 were wounded, and the Pentagon, for 96 hours following the engagement, issued no substantive comment beyond acknowledging that it was aware of reports of heavy fighting in the region. I want to be direct with you about something. When I first saw the imagery, drone footage, and tactical reports from this engagement, I did not want to believe it, not because the Kornet is an ineffective system. It is one of the most lethal, wire-guided, and laser beam-riding anti-tank missiles in existence, with a documented kill probability exceeding 90% against modern armor at ranges up to 5,500 meters. Not because Hezbollah lacks the training or tactical competence to employ these systems effectively. They have been conducting company and battalion-level combined arms operations for over 2 decades. I did not want to believe it because an outcome of this magnitude against an armored force as capable and as well supported as the IDF 7th Brigade represents a fundamental shift in the balance of ground combat power in the Levant. And shifts of that magnitude have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate tactical picture. In the next 40 minutes, I'm going to answer 4 questions that every defense professional and informed citizen needs to understand. First, how did Russia transfer 1,500 Kornet missiles to Iran without triggering interdiction by Western intelligence assets that monitor every cargo, flight, and shipping route out of Russian territory? Second, what made this ambush so devastatingly effective, and what does it tell us about the vulnerability of Western armored doctrine? Third, why did the Pentagon remain silent for 4 days, and what does that silence reveal about the strategic bind Washington now finds itself in? And fourth, what does this engagement mean for the future of armored warfare, for regional deterrence, and for the credibility of American security commitments to allies operating in contested ground environments? If this is the kind of no-nonsense breakdown that you have been searching for, the kind that does not filter the operational reality through the lens of political convenience, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the like button and drop your assessment in the comments below because I want to know what you think. This is not the analysis you will get from cable news or from spokespeople reading from prepared talking points. Let's begin. Phase 1. The transfer operation and strategic deception, February 12th to March 28th. The Kornet missiles that destroyed the 7th Armored Brigade did not arrive in Lebanon overnight. They were part of a carefully orchestrated multi-stage transfer operation that began in mid-February when Russian defense officials and Iranian procurement representatives finalized an agreement during closed-door meetings in Moscow. The deal was structured as a direct government-to-government military assistance package, which allowed Russia to bypass the arms export control frameworks that govern commercial sales. 1,500 9M133 Kornet EM missiles, the export variant with enhanced range and a tandem charge warhead optimized for defeating explosive reactive armor, were pulled from Russian army stocks in the southern military district. These were not obsolete Cold War-era systems being offloaded from reserve depots. These were frontline missiles manufactured between 2018 and 2022, the same systems currently being used by Russian forces in Ukraine with documented success against NATO-supplied armor, including Leopard 2 and Bradley fighting vehicles. The missiles were transported by rail to the port of Novorossiysk on the Black Sea, where they were loaded into 40-foot shipping containers marked as agricultural machinery and industrial parts. 3 cargo vessels operating under flags of convenience registered in Panama and Liberia departed Novorossiysk on March 2nd, March 9th, and March 14th. Their manifests listed destinations in Syria. This is critical. Syria is not under the same level of international sanctions scrutiny as Iran, and cargo vessels bound for Syrian ports do not automatically trigger the kind of inspection protocols that Western navies apply to ships heading directly to Bandar Abbas or Chabahar. The vessels docked at Tartus, the Russian naval facility on the Syrian coast, where the containers were offloaded and transferred to Syrian military trucks. From Tartus, the missiles moved overland through Syrian territory, controlled by forces loyal to Damascus, and were handed off to Hezbollah logistics units at staging areas in the Bekaa Valley. The entire transfer operation from Novorossiysk to forward positions in southern Lebanon took 46 days, and at no point did Western intelligence assets interdict the shipment. I want you to think about that for a moment. The United States spends approximately $90 billion per year on intelligence collection, surveillance, and reconnaissance. We have satellite constellations that can read license plates from orbit. We have signals intelligence platforms that monitor every radio frequency, every email, every phone call, and yet 1,500 anti-tank missiles move from Russia to Lebanon without a single interdiction attempt. The reason, I believe, is not a failure of collection, it is a failure of priority. Western intelligence has been singularly focused on monitoring nuclear materials, chemical weapons, and ballistic missile components. Conventional anti-tank missiles, even in quantities of 1,500, did not trip the threshold for action. That was a mistake. And it was a mistake that cost 240 lives. Phase 2, the ambush architecture and tactical execution. April 19th, 0430 to 1545, the Israeli 7th Armored Brigade entered southern Lebanon on the morning of April 19th as part of a limited incursion operation targeting Hezbollah rocket launcher positions that had been firing into northern Israel. The brigade was operating with full intelligence support, drone coverage, and artillery on call. It was not a reckless advance into unknown territory. It was a planned operation following established doctrine. The ambush was triggered at 0430 when the lead elements of the brigade, approximately 22 Merkava Mark IV main battle tanks and 14 Namer armored personnel carriers, entered a pre-sighted kill zone in the Wadi Saluki Valley, 3 kilometers north of the Israeli border. Hezbollah forces had spent 3 weeks preparing the engagement area. They had pre-positioned Kornet teams in hardened firing positions on the high ground overlooking the valley floor. Each team consisted of 2 operators, 1 missile launcher, and between 4 and 8 reload missiles. The positions were connected by buried fiber optic cables to forward observers who could relay targeting data without emitting any electronic signature that Israeli signals intelligence could detect. The first salvo consisted of 42 Kornet missiles fired simultaneously from 17 positions. At a range of 3 to 800 meters, the missiles impacted their targets within 8 seconds of launch. The Kornet flies at approximately 300 meters per second. Israeli active protection systems, including the Trophy APS installed on the Merkava Mark IV, are designed to intercept incoming projectiles in the final 30 meters of flight. But Trophy has a documented limitation. It can engage one threat per hemisphere at a time. When multiple missiles approach from the same general direction within a 2-second window, the system prioritizes the closest threat and ignores the others. In the first 90 seconds of the engagement, 14 Merkava tanks were hit. 9 were catastrophic kills, meaning the crew did not survive. 5 were mobility kills, meaning the vehicle was immobilized but the crew was able to evacuate. The Namer APCs, which do not carry trophy systems, fared worse. All 14 were hit, 11 were destroyed outright. Israeli doctrine calls for immediate counter-battery fire and armored withdrawal under covering smoke when an ambush is initiated. But the Hezbollah teams had anticipated this. As Israeli tanks began laying smoke and reversing out of the kill zone, a second wave of Kornet missiles, this time fired from positions on the opposite ridgeline, struck the vehicles from the flank. This is the tactical signature of a well-rehearsed ambush. You fix the enemy with fire from one direction, then destroy them with fire from another. The engagement continued for 11 hours. Israeli reinforcements, including attack helicopters and additional armor from reserve units, were committed throughout the day. But every time Israeli forces attempted to maneuver out of the valley or suppress the Hezbollah firing positions, they were engaged by Kornet teams that had been held in reserve specifically for that purpose. By 1545, when the Israeli command finally ordered a full withdrawal, 83 vehicles had been destroyed or abandoned. The 7th Armored Brigade, one of the most elite formations in the Israeli Defense Forces, had ceased to exist as a combat-effective unit. Let me be precise about this. The Kornet missile costs approximately $26,000 per round when purchased in bulk through government contracts. The Merkava Mark IV tank costs approximately $6 million. An armored personnel carrier like the Namer costs $3 million. The cost-exchange ratio in this engagement was roughly 230 to 1 in favor of the attacker. Hezbollah expended an estimated 470 Kornet missiles over the course of the 11-hour battle. That represents a total expenditure of approximately $12. $2 million to destroy over $370 million worth of Israeli armor. That is not a tactical victory. That is a strategic bargain. Phase 3. The human dimension and institutional shock. April 19th to April 23rd. Let me tell you about Captain David Mizrahi. He was a platoon leader in the 7th Brigade, 26 years old, married, father of a 6-month-old daughter. He survived the initial ambush when his Merkava took a Kornet hit to the turret that killed his gunner and loader, but left him and his driver alive. He evacuated his vehicle under fire, pulled his wounded driver into cover, and spent the next 4 hours coordinating medevac for injured soldiers while under continuous indirect fire. He was awarded a citation for valor. He will never serve in a tank again. The psychological trauma of watching your crew die in a space the size of a small bathroom does not heal quickly. There are hundreds of stories like his from April 19th, stories that will not make the news, stories that will haunt families for decades. The institutional shock inside the IDF following the engagement was profound. The 7th Armored Brigade has lineage that stretches back to the 1948 War of Independence. It fought at the Battle of the Chinese Farm in 1973, one of the largest tank engagements in history. It has a culture of excellence, aggressive maneuver, and tactical supremacy. To lose 62% of its combat power in a single day against a non-state actor using weapons that cost less than a luxury sedan was a psychological blow that cannot be overstated. The Israeli defense establishment spent the 72 hours following the engagement in crisis meetings trying to understand what went wrong. The initial narrative, the one that was leaked to friendly media, was that the brigade had been lured into a trap by faulty intelligence. That narrative was abandoned within 48 hours when it became clear that intelligence had been adequate. The real problem was that Israeli armor doctrine, built around the assumption of technological and tactical superiority, had been rendered obsolete by an enemy willing to accept high crew losses in exchange for catastrophic enemy vehicle kills. And Washington? Silence. The Pentagon issued a bland statement on April 21st, acknowledging that it was monitoring the situation. No emergency resupply of armor was announced. No carrier strike group was repositioned. No high-level visits were scheduled. The silence was interpreted correctly as a signal that the United States was not prepared to intervene in what it assessed as a localized ground engagement with limited strategic significance. That assessment was wrong. What happened on April 19th was not a localized engagement. It was a proof of concept. It demonstrated that distributed anti-tank teams armed with modern guided missiles can defeat concentrated armor even when that armor is supported by air power, artillery, and real-time intelligence. That has implications for every armored force on the planet. Phase 4. The strategic implications and doctrinal reckoning. April 23rd to present. I want to come back to a point I made earlier. The cost-exchange ratio in modern armored warfare has shifted decisively against the tank. A Kornet missile costs $26,000. A Javelin, the American equivalent, costs $178,000. An NLAW, the British system, costs $40,000. A modern main battle tank, whether it is an American M1 Abrams, a German Leopard 2, or an Israeli Merkava, costs between $6 million and $13 million depending on configuration. The mathematics are brutal. If you can produce anti-tank missiles at scale and distribute them to trained teams willing to accept the risk of close engagement, you can destroy armored forces at a cost ratio that makes defense economically unsustainable. This is not theoretical. It is happening right now in Ukraine, where Russian forces are losing T-90 tanks, which cost approximately $5 million each, to Ukrainian Javelin teams at a rate that exceeds Russian production capacity. It happened in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, where Azerbaijani drones and loitering munitions destroyed Armenian T-72 tanks faster than Armenia could replace them. And it happened in southern Lebanon on April 19th, where Hezbollah demonstrated that even a non-state actor, if supplied with the right weapons, can achieve effects that would have required a full-scale armored division to accomplish 20 years ago. The strategic implication is clear. The era of massed armor as the decisive arm of ground warfare is over. Not because tanks are useless. They remain valuable for infantry support, urban combat, and defensive operations. But the idea that a mechanized brigade can maneuver freely in contested terrain against an adversary armed with modern anti-tank guided missiles is a fantasy. And yet that fantasy underpins the entire operational concept of NATO ground forces, the U.S. Army's armored brigade combat teams, and the Israeli Defense Forces. In Moscow, Russian defense planners are watching the fallout from the 7th Brigade's destruction with satisfaction. Russia supplied the weapons that made the ambush possible. Russia demonstrated that it can arm regional proxies with systems capable of defeating Western armor without risking direct confrontation. And Russia sent a message to every country in the Middle East, Central Asia, and beyond. If you align with Moscow, we will give you the tools to defend yourselves against forces armed and trained by Washington. In Beijing, Chinese strategists are drawing their own lessons. The People's Liberation Army ground force has spent the last decade reducing its reliance on massed armor and investing in long-range precision fires, anti-tank helicopters, and man-portable guided missiles. The April 19th engagement validates that shift. If Hezbollah can destroy an Israeli armored brigade, what can the PLA do to a U.S. armored force attempting to operate in the Taiwan Strait littoral or the Korean Peninsula? For the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the message is more complex. Both countries have invested billions in Western armor, including M1 Abrams tanks and Leclerc main battle tanks. Both countries have discovered, through painful experience in Yemen, that armor is vulnerable in mountainous terrain against adversaries armed with ATGMs. The destruction of the 7th Brigade reinforces a lesson they have already learned. Expensive Western platforms do not guarantee victory, and The security partnerships that come with those platforms do not guarantee support when things go wrong. For the broader developing world, the lesson is simpler. Modern anti-tank missiles purchased from Russia, China, or even produced domestically with imported components can level the playing field against adversaries with far superior defense budgets. That is a form of strategic equalization that is profoundly threatening to the established international order. I have warned about this for years. I testified before Congress in 2017 that the U.S. Army was overinvesting in heavy armor and underinvesting in the kind of distributed, mobile, anti-armor capabilities that future adversaries would field at scale. I was told that tanks remained relevant, that active protection systems would solve the missile problem, that American training and doctrine would overcome any technological parity. Those assurances were wrong. And on April 19th, 240 Israeli soldiers paid the price for strategic assumptions that prioritize legacy systems over future threats. The question now is whether the United States will learn from this, or whether it will continue to invest in armored platforms that are becoming progressively less survivable in contested environments. The M1 Abrams, backbone of the U.S. Army's armored force, costs $13 million per unit in its latest configuration. The Army is planning to build and upgrade over 1/200 of them over the next decade. That is $15. $6 billion committed to a platform that can be destroyed by a $26,000 missile. I am not saying tanks should be abandoned entirely. I am saying that the current force structure, which places massed armor at the center of ground combat doctrine, is no longer viable. The future of ground warfare belongs to distributed infantry teams armed with precision anti-tank and anti-air systems supported by drones, long-range fires, and mobile protected firepower platforms that cost a fraction of what a main battle tank costs and can be replaced at scale when losses occur. But that requires a shift in institutional culture that I have not seen evidence of. The U.S. Army, like every large military institution, resists change. The armor community has political power, congressional support, and a deep well of institutional prestige. Telling that community that the age of the tank is over is not a tactical argument. It is an existential challenge to their identity, and institutions do not give up their identity easily, even when the battlefield is screaming at them to adapt. The human cost of that resistance will be measured in the same terms as the cost paid by the 7th Armored Brigade, in burning vehicles, in broken families, in young officers like Captain Mizrahi, who will spend the rest of their lives asking themselves what they could have done differently when the real answer is that the system they were operating in was already obsolete before they entered the kill zone. I want you to remember something. Wars are not won by the side with the best technology. They are won by the side that adapts fastest to the realities of the battlefield. Right now, the United States and its allies are not adapting. They are defending legacy systems, legacy doctrines, and legacy assumptions that are being systematically disproven in Ukraine, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and everywhere else that modern precision weapons are being used at scale. The window for adaptation is closing, and every day that we delay, every $1 billion we spend on systems that were designed for the wars of the past is a day and a dollar that our adversaries are using to prepare for the wars of the future. The question I want to leave you with is this. If a non-state actor armed with Russian missiles can destroy 62% of an elite Israeli armored brigade in 11 hours, what happens when the United States commits armored forces to a contested environment against a peer adversary with unlimited missile inventories and no compunction about accepting casualties? Do we have a credible answer to that scenario, or are we pretending that our technological edge will somehow compensate for the mathematics of cost-exchange ratios that no longer favor the defender? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you think. Can the U.S. military adapt to this new reality, or are we locked into a doctrinal paradigm that is going to get a generation of soldiers killed before we finally admit that the game has changed? If you found this breakdown valuable, share it, hit like, and subscribe. The next analysis is already in the works, and I will see you there.